Hello. The hospital room was filled with vibrant bouquets and congratulatory cards, a tribute to Anastasia after the birth of her first child. The newborn slept peacefully in his hospital crib, unaware of the tension around him. Anastasia, reclining on her bed, surrounded by pillows, was flipping through fashion magazines, clearly disinterested in the baby beside her. A nurse entered the room, a warm smile on her face as she held a fresh stack of diapers. "It's time for a feeding," she said softly, her eyes kind as she looked at the new mother. Anastasia wrinkled her nose, her gaze never leaving her magazine. "I am not feeding him myself." "Get that thing away from me," she snapped, dismissing her son with a wave. The nurse blinked, momentarily stunned. "But breast milk is incredibly beneficial for newborns. It's essential for his health and development," she replied gently, trying to reason with Anastasia. Anastasia rolled her eyes, her voice laced with irritation. "I have enough money to hire a nanny to deal with that. Just take him out of here," she said coldly, her gaze fixed on her magazine. Realizing any further discussion was pointless, the nurse let out a quiet sigh. She picked up the baby, who had started to fuss, and left the room, shaking her head in disbelief at the indifference of the child's mother. Across the hall, Svetlana lay alone in her own room, tears streaming down her face. Her baby girl had been stillborn, leaving her with empty arms and a shattered heart. Hearing the cries of the newborn boy from the neighboring room felt like a cruel reminder of her loss. The nurse, sensing Svetlana's pain, entered her room, holding the crying infant. "I'm so sorry to disturb you, Svetlana," she began gently. "But there's an issue. The mother in the next room refuses to feed her child, and he's terribly hungry. Would you mind holding him? Maybe your warmth can help him settle down." Without hesitation, Svetlana reached for the baby, who quieted almost immediately in her arms. She gazed down at his tiny face, her heart swelling with both sorrow and a renewed sense of purpose. After a moment's pause, she looked up at the nurse. I can try to feed him," she whispered, a flicker of hope lighting her tear-streaked face. "If he's hungry, I'll feed him. I still have milk." The nurse's eyes lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Svetlana. You have no idea how much you're helping this little one," she said softly, stepping back to let Svetlana and the baby bond. As Svetlana held the baby close, he nuzzled her and began to nurse, his breathing growing steady and calm. Her heart, aching from her own loss, softened with the knowledge that she could still offer love and life to this innocent child. In the days that followed, the hospital staff quickly fell into a routine. Each time Anastasia refused to care for her baby boy, the nurses would quietly bring him to Svetlana. She would cradle him, feeding him and soothing him with whispered lullabies, her heart beginning to mend as she poured love into this tiny, abandoned soul. Svetlana's attachment to the child grew stronger with each passing day. She named him Misha in her mind, cherishing each moment she spent with him as though he were her own. Every feeding, every quiet moment, every small sigh he made felt like a gift, a reminder that even in loss, there could still be purpose and a reason to move forward. One afternoon, as the nurse brought the baby into Svetlana's room, she gently remarked, "He's taken to you as if you're his mother." Svetlana's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at Misha, who was dozing peacefully in her arms. "He's brought me so much comfort," she whispered. "I lost my daughter, but with him here, it's like I still have something to give." Meanwhile, Anastasia's attitude remained indifferent, even hostile. Each time a nurse would suggest bonding with her child, she would brush them off with a dismissive wave. "I didn't sign up for sleepless nights or dirty diapers," she would say with an eye roll. "I'll hire someone to handle all that when I leave here. I have other things to focus on." Rumors of her indifference began to circulate among the hospital staff. Nurses, doctors, and even the cleaning staff shared quiet conversations about the young mother who seemed to have no interest in her newborn. Some were shocked, others saddened, but none could understand the depth of her detachment. For Svetlana, however, Misha became a bright spot in her otherwise dark world. Every time she held him, every time he looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes, her heart felt a little fuller. The pain of losing her daughter was still raw, but Misha's presence soothed her in a way she hadn't thought possible. One evening, as she gently rocked Misha to sleep, a thought crept into her mind, a thought that, once there, refused to leave. What if I could take him home? She knew it was a distant dream, that Misha wasn't hers to keep. But the bond she felt was undeniable, and she couldn't shake the hope that maybe, just maybe, fate had brought this child into her life for a reason. As Svetlana's days in the hospital neared their end, the thought of leaving without Misha weighed heavily on her heart. Each time she fed him or held him close, her longing to take him home grew stronger. She knew it was a far-fetched dream, but the idea wouldn't let go. How could she walk away from the little boy who had filled the emptiness her daughter's loss had left behind? Meanwhile, Anastasia continued to show no interest in her child. She spent her time on the phone, chatting with friends about the parties she'd missed or scrolling through social media, her mind seemingly far from the role of a mother. Each time a nurse gently nudged her to feed or spend time with her son, Anastasia would dismiss the suggestion, insisting that she'd sort out the childcare situation once she was out of the hospital. With only a few days left before she was to be discharged, Svetlana made a decision. Swallowing her nerves, she waited for a quiet moment, then approached the head nurse, a kind woman who had seen Svetlana's attachment to the child and sympathized with her pain. Could I talk to you?" Svetlana began, her voice barely a whisper. The nurse looked up, her gaze softening. "Of course, Svetlana. What's on your mind?" Taking a deep breath, Svetlana expressed her heartfelt plea. "I know this may sound impossible, but I've bonded with him, with the baby boy. Anastasia doesn't seem to want him, and I can't bear the thought of leaving him behind. Is there any way I could take him home with me? To adopt him?" The nurse's expression softened, her eyes filled with compassion and concern. "Svetlana, I know how much you've come to care for him, and I understand the bond you formed. But adoption is a complex process, and it's up to Anastasia to decide what happens with her child. As much as it pains me to say it, she is his mother, legally." Svetlana's heart sank, but she nodded, not wanting to appear desperate, even though that's exactly how she felt. "I understand," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But, if there's any chance she's open to it, if she truly doesn't want him." The nurse gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Let me see what I can do, Svetlana. I'll talk to Anastasia and find out where her heart really lies." That evening, the nurse approached Anastasia, delicately broaching the subject. "Anastasia, we've noticed that you haven't shown much interest in bonding with your son. Have you given any thought to what you want for him once you're discharged?" Anastasia barely looked up from her phone, shrugging. "I already told you, I'll hire help. Nannies, babysitters, whatever it takes. I'm just not the hands-on type, you know?" The nurse hesitated, then carefully continued. "There is someone here who has grown very attached to him. Svetlana, a woman who lost her own baby, has been caring for him. If you'd ever consider it, she would gladly take him in." Anastasia's expression shifted, a glint of interest sparking in her eyes. "You mean, she wants him? She actually wants to take him?" The nurse nodded, watching for any hint of Anastasia's true feelings. "Yes. She would love him as her own." Anastasia looked away, thinking it over, an idea forming in her mind. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. If she wants him, I'm willing to consider it." The nurse left, a glimmer of hope in her heart. The possibility of reuniting Misha with someone who genuinely loved him was closer than she dared to imagine. And for Svetlana, the chance to become his mother, even against all odds, was suddenly within reach. The following morning, the head nurse shared Anastasia's response with Svetlana, who listened with hopeful anticipation. The news filled her with a mix of joy and disbelief. Anastasia was actually open to giving her child away. Svetlana could barely contain her emotions, but she tried to remain calm, understanding that there were still formalities to handle and decisions to be confirmed. Anastasia was scheduled to meet with social services that day to finalize her choice. Although her initial reaction had been casual, almost indifferent, the nurse hoped that, When the time came, Anastasia would commit to the decision for the child's sake. Svetlana waited anxiously in her hospital room, clutching the tiny blanket that had kept Misha warm on so many sleepless nights. Each minute felt like an hour, her heart pounding as she imagined what it would be like to finally bring Misha home, to give him the life and love he deserved. She was prepared to give him everything, her undivided love, her protection, her guidance, and to be the mother he needed. Later that afternoon, the social worker arrived, accompanied by Anastasia, who wore a bored expression as she took her seat across the table. She looked as if she were being forced to sit through an inconvenience rather than make a life-changing decision. The social worker laid out the paperwork, explaining the implications and the permanence of giving up parental rights. Anastasia sighed, flipping through the forms carelessly. "Look, I'm not cut out for this," she said dismissively. "If this other woman wants him, then fine. It's one less thing for me to worry about." The social worker gave her a measured look, making sure she understood the weight of her decision. "This is a permanent choice, Anastasia. Once you sign these papers, your rights as his mother will be fully terminated. You won't be able to reclaim custody or contact him in the future." Anastasia waved a hand as if brushing off an annoying fly. "I get it. Just give me the pen," she replied, picking up the pen and scribbling her signature without a second thought. Within minutes, the paperwork was signed. It was done, Anastasia had relinquished her rights, and Misha was no longer hers. When the nurse informed Svetlana, she let out a cry of joy, tears streaming down her face. She could hardly believe it, her dream had come true. The nurse assured her that she would now begin the formal adoption process, a journey that might take a few months but was already on a strong footing. That evening, for the first time, Svetlana held Misha with a new sense of certainty. He was hers, truly and legally hers. The pain of her own loss had found meaning in this beautiful, unexpected gift. With Anastasia's decision finalized, Svetlana began the official adoption process. Although it would take several weeks to complete, everyone involved knew it was just a matter of formalities now. The hospital staff, touched by Svetlana's devotion to Misha, offered their support, guiding her through the necessary paperwork and setting her up with resources to help her prepare for her new life as his mother. Each day that Svetlana spent with Misha felt like a gift. She poured all of her love, care, and energy into him, committing to learning everything she needed to be the best mother she could. She took notes from the nurses on infant care, memorized his feeding schedule, and even sang to him, songs that she had once planned to sing to her own daughter. Misha responded to her love, gazing up at her with a calm, trusting expression that melted her heart every time. One afternoon, as Svetlana was feeding him, a nurse entered with a folder containing some initial adoption paperwork. "This is the first step, Svetlana. The formal process will still take time, but I thought you'd want to keep this with you." Svetlana took the folder, her hands trembling as she flipped through the documents. Seeing her name listed as Misha's prospective mother made it all feel real. She could hardly contain her tears as she realized that soon, the little boy she held in her arms would officially be her son. As she signed each page, the future she'd barely dared to dream about began to take shape. She envisioned days filled with laughter, sleepless nights rocking him back to sleep, first steps, birthdays, and endless memories that they would create together. For Svetlana, the emptiness left by her daughter's loss was finally being filled by the love she had for Misha. Meanwhile, word of the adoption spread throughout the hospital. Nurses, doctors, and staff who had witnessed her heartbreak and resilience rallied around her, offering warm congratulations and small gifts for Misha. They admired the strength of a woman who, in the face of profound loss, found a way to open her heart again and build a new family from the ashes of her grief. As the final days of her hospital stay approached, Svetlana looked forward to bringing Misha home. It would be the beginning of a life she hadn't expected, but one that already felt destined. Finally, the day arrived for Svetlana to take Misha home. The adoption paperwork was still being processed, but Svetlana was granted permission to bring him into her care as his legal guardian while the final steps were completed. It was a day filled with anticipation, joy, and a touch of disbelief. Svetlana packed the few belongings she'd brought to the hospital, gathering every little memento from her days with Misha, the blanket he'd first been wrapped in, his tiny hat, and the toys she'd kept by his crib. As she dressed Misha in a soft, warm outfit gifted by one of the nurses, her heart swelled with gratitude. The support she'd received from the hospital staff had been overwhelming, each person cheering her on and sharing in the happiness of her newfound purpose. Nurses, doctors, and even the cleaning staff gathered to see her off, offering hugs, warm words, and well wishes. The head nurse, who had been with her every step of the way, handed her a small card and a carefully wrapped gift. "This is for you and Misha," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given us all hope, Svetlana. You reminded us of the power of love." Svetlana's eyes filled with tears as she embraced the nurse, thanking her for everything. With Misha nestled securely in her arms, she walked out of the hospital, taking in a deep breath of fresh air. This was their first moment together outside the walls where they'd met, and it felt symbolic, a true beginning. The drive home was surreal. Svetlana kept glancing at Misha in the rearview mirror, his tiny face calm as he slept, unaware of the profound change that had taken place. When they arrived at her small apartment, she carried him inside, marveling at the simple fact that she could now call this little boy her own. Once inside, Svetlana gently laid Misha in the crib she'd prepared for him. She sat by his side, watching him sleep, a peacefulness settling over her that she hadn't felt in a long time. Her home, which had once felt empty and echoing with the loss of her daughter, was now filled with warmth, purpose, and hope. Over the next few days, she and Misha settled into their new life together. Every smile, every coo, every tiny milestone felt like a miracle to her. The pain of her past loss was still there, a quiet ache that would likely never fully fade, but Misha's presence filled her with a love that made each day brighter. As she held Misha close, Svetlana knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. She had been given a second chance at motherhood, and she was determined to give him the life he deserved, a life filled with love, care, and endless support. Together, they would create a future born from both loss and resilience, a life defined not by what they had lost, but by the love they had found. As the weeks passed, Svetlana and Misha's bond deepened. With the adoption process moving forward smoothly, it was only a matter of time before he would legally become her son. But in her heart, he was already hers. Every tiny smile, every babbling sound, every sleepless night spent rocking him back to sleep reminded her that they were now a family. Svetlana's days quickly fell into a new rhythm. She returned to her work, adjusting her schedule to balance her responsibilities as a mother, all while finding joy in the smallest moments with Misha. Her mornings were filled with gentle lullabies and baby giggles, and her evenings with bedtime stories and quiet moments spent watching him sleep. Her once lonely home was now filled with laughter and warmth. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail confirming that Misha's adoption would be finalized in a few weeks. The words brought tears to her eyes. The journey that had started with unimaginable heartbreak was now coming full circle. Misha would soon be her son, legally and officially. She would no longer fear that he could be taken from her or that the bond they'd built could be undone. In preparation for the finalization, Svetlana poured herself into making a home that was truly theirs. She painted his nursery in soft colors, filled it with books, toys, and decorations that felt meaningful. Friends and colleagues, inspired by her journey, came together to support her, offering gifts and assistance to make sure Misha had everything he needed. The head nurse from the hospital even visited one afternoon, bringing with her a memory box for Svetlana and Misha to fill with mementos from their life together. "These memories are the foundation of your new family," she said warmly. Svetlana placed Misha's tiny hospital hat and the card from the hospital staff inside, symbols of the incredible journey that had brought them together. As the day of the final adoption hearing approached, Svetlana's heart brimmed with gratitude and hope. She knew that her life had changed in ways she hadn't planned, and while her past loss would always be a part of her, she now saw it as a chapter that had led her to this beautiful new beginning. In a few short weeks, Misha would legally be hers, but in every way that mattered, he already was. Together, they were not just surviving, they were thriving, building a life filled with love, resilience, and joy. And for Svetlana, that life was everything she had ever hoped for and more. The day of the final adoption hearing arrived, and Svetlana felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She dressed Misha in a tiny suit, his bright eyes and curious smile reflecting the warmth and security he'd found in her care. Friends and supportive hospital staff gathered in the courthouse to witness the moment that would officially make Misha her son. As they stood before the judge, Svetlana was asked to affirm her commitment to Misha, to promise to care for him, love him, and protect him as her own. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke. "He is already my son in every way that matters. I promise to give him the life he deserves, to always be there for him, and to love him unconditionally." The judge nodded, his expression softening. "It is clear that you are deeply committed to Misha, and it's also clear that he has found his mother." With the stroke of a pen, the adoption was finalized. Misha was now, in every legal sense, her child. A ripple of applause filled the room, and Svetlana, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, hugged Misha tightly, whispering, "We did it, my sweet boy. You're truly mine now." After the hearing, Svetlana and Misha joined friends for a small celebration, where laughter and joy filled the air. She felt the support and love surrounding her, a community of people who had witnessed her journey from loss to healing and from heartbreak to hope. The painful memories of her past loss had not vanished, but they had softened, becoming a part of the foundation that strengthened her love for Misha. That night, back at home, Svetlana put Misha to bed in his newly decorated nursery. She watched him drift off to sleep, his tiny hand curled around her finger, his breathing calm and steady. Her heart swelled with gratitude. She had found purpose, joy, and healing in the place she'd least expected. Svetlana knew that the journey wasn't over. Parenting would bring its own set of challenges and triumphs. But she also knew that she was ready, that every moment with Misha was a gift she would cherish forever. The bond they shared was built from resilience and love, a bond that was unbreakable. As she whispered goodnight to her son, she realized that she had been given a second chance at motherhood, a chance to create a life of love, warmth, and security for Misha. And as she closed the door, leaving a soft nightlight glowing by his crib, Svetlana knew that, at last, they were both exactly where they belonged. Bye-bye.